Hi everyone, it's Maddie Brady. We're here to get real about mental health. Stay tuned for some great conversations with some very special guests. Hi everyone, welcome to the Get Real show. We are here with Meg. So I actually just met you last week at the Release Recovery Run, and you work for the Phoenix, which is a recovery nonprofit that does lots of fun activities, right?
Yeah. I'm Meg. I'm an alcoholic. I volunteer with the Phoenix, and it's a really cool organization. They do free activities for anyone with 48 hours of sobriety. So you can bring your friends if they can commit to that 48 hours, but it's really an amazing community that builds connection through activity.
That's great. I was saying, so right before I met you was when I discovered the Phoenix like a week or two prior, and the day before I was in REI with my girlfriend that was up, and I was saying we should go rock climbing, we should do this, we should do that, just all the gear they have just had me wanting to go rock climbing upstate. And then the next day I met someone that worked for the Phoenix, and he was like, yeah, we go rock climbing, we do this, just listing like every single activity. I was just saying, why don't we try this, why don't we try that?
Yeah.
It seems really cool, and I still haven't made it to any of the rock climbing events yet, but that's to come this summer.
We'll get you on the wall.
But I would love to know about your story. I know we talked a little bit prior, but what really made you get into addiction? What you think really led you down that path, and why you decided to get sober?
Yeah, for sure. I guess I'm of the belief that I was born an addict. And I'm definitely not a doctor or a neurologist. I don't know anything about that stuff, but I don't really remember a normal relationship with alcohol. But I grew up in a small ski town. And I grew up with loving parents. I didn't really have anything like that you could point to, but I definitely always felt like off, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like I felt like other people had the manual to life, and that like somehow I missed that manual, and everyone else knew what to do and I just like didn't. And then like I kind of drank a little bit in high school, but not much, which is interesting. But every time I did drink, I felt so cool,
Mm-hmm.
like I just felt like I fit in, and like people were finally gonna like me, and that I was gonna be like cool. And that was like a little bit in my like sophomore and junior year of high school. And didn't really drink much my senior year because I really liked running, and so I was kind of pretty into running and like less into like I guess the party scene.
Mm-hmm.
But I got really into like smoking weed, and I got my med card when I turned 18 because you could do that in Colorado. And again, I just thought that was the coolest thing. Like I just wanted to be cool. And I went to college at CU Boulder, and didn't really I just like smoked a lot of weed up until like the spring of my freshman year. When I like got really into drinking, and kind of right away, and this is like again like my first experience with weed, my first experience with drinking, like all those things were like so much right at the beginning, but yeah, like right away in like the spring of my freshman year of college, I just like going out, blacking out like all the time, not remembering anything, like trying to come up with ways to like keep track of how much I drank, like marking it on my hands, just like anything like that. Trying to like drink water in between, trying to bring my own drinks so that I could like somehow manage like not drinking more. And it was definitely really scary. Like I definitely ended up in situations that like I wouldn't wish on anybody, but really all that did was like give me something else to drink at. And so, it just kind of spiraled from there. I thought that's what everyone was doing, so it seemed fine. And I didn't really like analyze what my personal experience with alcohol was like. I didn't know that other people like were able to stop when they wanted to stop. I thought that we were like all fighting this battle to like not black out. Yeah. And then I guess like kind of continuing on, I just kept drinking. I studied abroad my whole junior year. And like that, some of that stuff was like definitely really weird and dark, and just ending up like I was in Chile, and I would just like end up in places and really have no recollection of getting there. which is wild to me. And
Yeah.
it didn't seem dangerous. Like, it just felt like it was the price to pay for drinking. I just didn't see it as being bad. And looking back on it now, I'm like so grateful that I made it through all of that. And then, yeah, in Morocco, it was like a little different just because it was a Muslim country. So alcohol was like either really hard to get or really expensive. But ecstasy, interestingly enough, was like really cheap and readily available.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I got like really into that. And yeah, it just all felt like the normal thing to do, you know? And I never like analyzed it. I never looked at it. I just like was doing that. And this whole time, actually, I should say, because it like plays into where I'm at now, like this whole time I was running marathons, which is really interesting. And I think like running was like the only thing that kept me getting up in the morning, that I like wanted to like go on these long runs to like explore where I was living or to like shake out the alcohol. Like I would wake up and I would still be drunk and I would just like run it off, which I think is like great. Like I'm glad I had that. I'm so glad I had that at the time because it, you know, I think did give me some sense of like pride and self-esteem. But yeah, then I came back from that junior year. And I kind of always say that, like, that summer is, like, when things transitioned from, like, sometimes fun, sometimes not, to not fun at all. And I was living at home in my hometown. And, again, it's, like, really small town. So if you mess up, like, your parents find out about what you did before you find out about what you did.
Yeah.
And I would get kicked out of the bars, or I wouldn't get let in, or I would just be, like, out and about wandering the streets, like, just really stuff that was embarrassing. And I remember, like, one time my mom asked me if, like, when I go out, if I ever tried drinking less. And I just was so shocked by that question because I thought that that was what drinking was. Like, I thought that drinking was, like, trying to drink less. I didn't know that other people just choose how much they drink, and that they, like, you know, they don't struggle with it. And so I remember being really shocked by that question, and it started to, like, sit a seed in my head of, like, is this not the normal experience with alcohol? And so then I went back to college my senior year, and my friends had all, when I was abroad, had all discovered cocaine. And I heard your story on a previous podcast. I related a lot. Like, the second I did cocaine, it immediately took over my life. I didn't ever, it went from, like, me trying it to me doing it on, like, every day, you know, and then me trying not to do it. Like, it was so crazy how quickly it took over my life. And I just, like, I didn't identify as that person. I don't know if that makes sense, but, like, I just was, like, I cared about school. I cared about running. Like, I cared about all those things. And I just, like, was all of a sudden, like, not. Like, I was all of a sudden, like, doing really weird stuff to, like, make cocaine a part of my life.
Yeah.
And I found out that I had run a marathon in Chile, and I had, like, done a 10-day backpacking trip leading up to the marathon, and then, like, 2 days later ran the marathon, and then I ran a marathon in Morocco, and I hadn't really trained much, and so I had, like, partially torn my hamstring at some point, but I had, like, run on it the whole time, that whole summer, like, everything, I just was still running. All of a sudden, I couldn't really walk normally, and so I went to the PT, and I found out that I had, like, partially torn my hamstring, so I couldn't run anymore, and, like, that kind of coincided with, like, me finding cocaine. And I just, like, all of a sudden, everything that was, like, keeping my life in check was just gone. And I kind of look at it like I'd been juggling so many things. Like, I had an internship, I had a job, I was, like, a TA, I was really passionate about school. And then, like, just one ball fell and just everything fell. And I just spent that, you know, like, the next 6 months trying to quit, which is a really, like, lonely place to be. And kind of scary, right? Like, and I'm sure you relate, and people that have struggled with it relate, like, to be trying not to do something that you're doing is, like, confusing.
Yeah.
And pretty lonely. And so, yeah, I spent, like, that year trying to quit, and eventually I, you know, made a pretty big mistake, and I, like, finally, like, woke up. And I guess, like, another important thing that I'll say is, like, I was back home in Steamboat for, like, closing weekend of the ski mountain, and my mom had brought in my dad and me and her all each one beer before my friend was going to pick me up to go back to Boulder. And I, like, got to the end of that beer and my skin was just crawling. Like, I was obsessive about trying to find another way to like have another drink. And it was like the most uncomfortable I'd ever been. And it was also the thing I always said I wanted. Like I always said I wanted one drink, and I had one drink, and I never wanted to feel that way again. And I think like that was like a month before I got sober. And I just, I guess probably even like a couple weeks before I got sober. And yeah, I just was like, oh, my experience with alcohol is not, there's no way that this is what people feel like when they drink one drink. And so, yeah, I like a couple weeks later made a pretty big mistake, and I just woke up the next day, and I like, so I describe it that like my life was like two spheres, and each one had a small window, and for the first time those windows lined up, and I just like saw myself as an alcoholic. And before that, I think I had like always joked about being an alcoholic, but I like intellectually knew that my experience with alcohol was different, but like emotionally I hadn't grasped that that meant that I had no control over it, and that like I couldn't stop, and so in that moment I like just didn't want it anymore. Yeah, like I just remember being like, I don't want this anymore. I don't want this part of my story anymore. And I just like, I can like feel just being like, nope, I don't want that anymore. And I like messaged this girl on Instagram who I had like never really talked to much, but she went to my high school, and like 8 months before then I found, she posted again like later. So I found out that it was like 8 months before that day she had posted on Instagram that she had a year of sobriety. And my brain had remembered it for 8 months. And I like reached out to her and said like, hey, I need help getting sober. And she looked up a meeting for me to go to and said, text me when you get there and text me when you leave. And like to this day, that's like still kind of the only time that I like have ever really talked to her. But yeah, she saved my life. And I just like didn't know what to do. I didn't know like what people did when they were trying to get sober. I thought alcoholics were like people under the bridge, like they say that. And I just was like, but I knew I didn't want to feel the way I felt. And I like thought my life was over. I thought that like I was doomed to boredom, that I was just going to like live the most boring life. And all these things that I said I liked doing, I hadn't been doing, So it's funny that I look at that now and like, I thought I was like never going to ski or never going to bike or never. And like, I'm sure you know this, like the outdoor industry is like really heavily tied to alcohol. And so I thought like nobody would ever want to like hang out with me if I didn't drink, but that was definitely better than how I was feeling. And so I just like decided to get sober. And that was like, I looked back on my like, so I got sober in May, and so I just had like my Facebook memories come up. But yeah, it was like about 11 days before I graduated college. And I was so intent on like getting plastered at graduation. Like I just remembered like that feeling like a really big deal that I like didn't get to drink at graduation. But like lo and behold, I went to this resource group on campus called the Collegiate Recovery Center, CRC. And I just remember like pacing the hallway outside and just being like, oh my God, what if someone's in there? Like, that's why I was going, to hope that someone was in there. But I was so afraid that someone was going to be in there. And I was just pacing outside, like so afraid to go in. And I eventually went in, and like this woman was like sitting there, and she, like asked me like, so we went and talked, and she was asking me like kind of a little bit about my story, and like where I was at. And I think I probably had like 2 days at the time. And yeah, she got me connected with like other college kids in recovery. This again was like 11 days before I graduated college, and it was so special. She like invited me to their graduation, and she gave me cords to wear at graduation. And like I had 11 days, like wow. I had like no time. I get emotional thinking about it just because like so many people don't come back, and she just like didn't care if I came back or not. She was just like, you can be a part of our community even if it's only for 11 days. And yeah, I like came back for a grad program immediately. So I just stayed for like a 1-year grad program and like got plugged in through that community. And there was like tons of other college kids on campus, like getting sober. They had meetings, and we would all go to the Phoenix actually. So we'd all go climbing on Fridays, and like do like they had a ski trip. Like we went to Telluride, and got to ski in Telluride and ice climb in Ouray. And, like, I just look back on that time so fondly. Like, I was a kid, and I was learning how to, like, make friends for the first time. And, like, I feel like that's pretty delayed. Most people do that before their senior year of college. But, I just, like, remember feeling so held by that community. Like, just really, like, all my best friends were there. And, like, these people, like, we were fighting the same thing together. And, like, we all would just do everything together. Like, we would just, like, hang out, like, go sledding, go hiking. Like, when you're in college and you're not drinking, you, like, get up to some stuff, Like, we would really get into some stuff. And it was really, really special. Yeah, and then, I, like, ended up meeting my now fiancé through that. And, I guess, like, that's kind of where I am today is, like, I obviously finished grad school. I got a job. I was living in Denver for a little bit. My fiance got into grad school here. I moved to New York City like a year and a half ago. I got a new job when I moved here, and I, like, love the career I'm building. Yeah, and, like, sobriety is a huge, huge part of my life. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine moving to New York City without being sober. Like, that's how I've met so many amazing people. And, yeah, like, the Phoenix, I just started volunteering with the Phoenix back in, like, the winter. And I'm so excited to be back involved with them. They were a huge part of my early recovery. And I'm so excited to, like, give back to that community that saved my life, that showed me, like, sobriety is not boring. And, yeah, like, I love, it's, like, even more special in New York, like, working in a climbing gym and, like, seeing people with, like, a couple days come in from the South Bronx who, like, probably never would have otherwise, like, stepped foot in a climbing gym. And they're, like, this is what sobriety is? Like, yeah, I can do this, Yeah. And I'm just so honored to get to be there for that. Like, it just feels, yeah, I wish that I could go back and tell that girl, like, 5 years ago, like, your life's going to blow your mind. But, yeah, I think you got to go through it to get there. I feel like that was long, but.
No, that was amazing. And I think your story is so incredible and so relatable, where I felt like the entire time I was reflecting on, I remember that part of my journey in this, because although we were living on different parts of the country and it was a bit different, there's so many parallels where it's like, looking back from the beginning for me, same thing. It was never a normal relationship with alcohol. And I felt like I told you I also had struggled with eating disorder. So it felt like everything was just a fight for me. So I didn't know any differently. Okay, so eating's a fight, drinking's a fight. Like at that time, because it both happened kind of all at once. So it went from just looking back on my childhood and my teen years, having that feeling of being a little bit different and always feeling like I was on the outside. I've heard someone else say that they felt like they didn't have the manual for life, and I've never heard something depict it so clearly of the feeling I had, because I had friends and I had a normal childhood and I lived in a great town and had parents and all this stuff, but I always felt a little bit on the outside, like I was looking in at everything. And then the second I started drinking, and then I remember the first year for me was a little bit better, but it still was like I was having like episodes where it was really bad one night, but then other nights I could kind of be fine. And then the second I got into the eating habits and then mixing that with alcohol, and then it just spiraled so quickly. And then same thing, as soon as several years into my journey, I mean, things were already wildly out of control. And then the second you touch cocaine, it was just like game over. And I feel like looking back, I felt like it really coincided with my eating disorder when I was drinking, and that was it. I was more restricting and drinking, and I felt like I was in control, even though I was completely out of control. And then things digressed in both aspects, where then I became bulimic and was dealing with cocaine, and everything was abundantly clear that it was now out of control. And then really just following your story, I think it's so incredible that you got sober in college and were able to stay on path, because that's something that I did not experience at all. It took me a really long time, I feel like, to get back on my feet and figure everything out, and that you were able to just 11 days before graduation be like, this is what we're doing. And it's crazy to think that you really do think, because I remember having the exact same thoughts, my life is over. Like, I'm going to be a weirdo. I'm never going to have friends. I'm never going to have fun. I'm never going to meet someone. And especially for females, I always hear people say, oh, I'm not going to be able to drink on my wedding day. And then you thought right away, like, oh, it's the biggest deal. I can't drink on graduation. And it's crazy to think that our minds are wired to think about these huge life events needing there to be alcohol, or it doesn't count, or it's like we're not looking forward to them, or think they won't be memorable. In reality, we wouldn't have remembered it. Like, I remember having a high school graduation party and blacking out after maybe an hour, after my mom planned all this stuff and tried to be nice, tried to make sure everything was set for me, and I blacked out after an hour and woke up the next morning having zero idea what happened, and like having to walk out of my room like, whoops, like my whole family, everyone. And to think like those events now will actually be able to remember and be able to experience joy and experience real emotions on them. But our first thought is, oh, well, I can't have a glass of champagne. Oh, I can't have like something to toast with for graduation, when it's like, we know we're not just having a glass of champagne. It's not going to be that. But I thought it was interesting in the beginning of your story when you talked about really being involved with weed. And I didn't really have that in my journey at all, but I hear very controversial opinions on that. Some people say it has nothing to do with addiction, and other people say it's heavily tied to it. What do you feel like it was like for you?
Yeah, I feel pretty strongly that I was addicted to weed. I guess so I met this girl who I ended up meeting through sobriety as well when I was still smoking weed, and we would go skiing together, and she told me she was sober. I just remember being like, yeah, but you could still smoke weed because it's like not addictive. Meanwhile, like I was smoking weed every day, you know, like waking up in the morning, getting high before class. Just like it was really like taking up a big chunk of my life. And then, actually, I guess like when I was abroad, interestingly stories, but I was tripping shrooms, and I had like, I suppose, some type of spiritual experience where I realized I was addicted to weed. And this was like before I got sober, but I realized like how much of my life was dedicated to like the buying, smoking, and getting high. Like it was just a huge chunk of my day. And I quit that day, and that was like about a year before I got sober. And I like feel for people whose drug of choice is weed, because I do think there's a lot of rhetoric around it not being that bad. But like I think you can spend your whole life getting high, and your whole life passes you by, and the consequences aren't as like steep maybe as like with drinking, and so you might not like come to the realization that like it's a problem. And I do think that for people that struggle with addiction, like weed is, you know, I do think a problem. Maybe not like in the same physical dependence. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not a neurologist, but yeah, I'm glad I don't smoke weed.
Do you feel like it's just the numbing all emotions out and just living in that high that's the issue? What would you say was the main downfall of smoking weed for you?
Yeah, I mean, because my life ended up being so taken over by things that were like significantly more draining, it's hard to think back, but I do remember just like everything being hazy all the time. Like I just was like never really normal, you know. Even when I wasn't high, I was like coming down, or like hadn't had a normal night's sleep, or you know, like I just wasn't really ever like, I think it like masked like issues with food too. Like I never really got to like address a relationship with food, or like discover who I am without it, kind of thing. Like I think it depends, I guess, on how you use it, and that goes the same with anything. And I don't want to like dictate how other people experience drugs the way that I do, because they could experience it differently than me. But yeah, I definitely think it was like, you know, I was choosing not to be sober in moments that I could have been sober. And like the weed was like a part of the experience, like, you know, go on a hike and get high instead of like go on a hike and be on a hike, you know, like it was just like, I think part of what I wanted to be doing.
It sounds very similar to the issue that arises with alcohol, where every event, everything you're doing with friends ends up being around alcohol or weed. And sometimes the friends you're choosing during that period aren't even your real friends.
Yeah.
They just also like alcohol or weed or insert any other substance you're using.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it takes over your entire life and becomes your entire personality as well.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And then in sobriety, I mentioned before, I remember being scared, like, is sobriety going to be my whole personality now? Because alcohol was my whole personality before. And it's amazing that so many other things come with sobriety. Like, I'm glad if sobriety is my whole life, I'm glad, because it's not just sobriety, it's being able to rock climb or roller skate or go for runs and do all these amazing things. And I was still running, another similarity with our stories, I was still running while drinking, but it was so negative during my drinking years. Like, it actually wasn't that negative for me prior to drinking. As soon as I started drinking, it became a really negative experience where it was self-punishment. It was really hateful speaking to myself in my head. And even though I was doing these activities, I wasn't really doing them the way I am today. It was more so, I'm just going to do this because I have to, or just basically to stay on track even somewhat. But then it's not enjoyable when you're speaking to yourself that way. Or there was my whole life other than running, which I was honestly only doing because of my eating disorder so frequently and doing it so negatively. But other than that, everything else for me lacked consistently. I'd be like, oh, I'm going to get really into paddling this summer. Would go a couple times. Like, oh, I'm going to really get into rowing this summer. Same thing, go a couple times. And there was no consistency with any activity that I would say that I was going to do. And then as soon as I got into sobriety, you actually can, if you want to go off and go paddling all summer, you can. And you actually can be there for yourself and wake up. And I think that applies too, even to just showing up for other people, because first you have to show up for yourself. And now that I can say, okay, I'm going to go paddling 3 days this week and actually do it, then when I'm supposed to be there for a friend or family member, I can actually do it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think I was actually talking with my sponsee about this yesterday, but like before getting sober, my whole personality was like, I guess whatever I was like into at the time, right? So it was like beer or weed or like whatever. And now like the lack of drinking in my life is not anything to do with who I am. You know, like sobriety is like not the biggest thing about me. Like it's the most important thing, I think, to me in my life. But yeah, like the biggest thing about me is like all the things that I do, that I get to do and that I want to do. I like think back to like before getting sober, and I would just like identify as these things. Like I would identify as a skier, or I would identify as a biker, but I wasn't biking. Like I wasn't skiing, you know, I was sitting in the basement looking at my gear. And I just was like, I couldn't wake up and go skiing. Like I was not physically well. And yeah, it's just like, it's funny to think about like how I felt like I was going to lose those things that I had already lost. Yeah. And now I like have them in tenfold.
Yeah. I feel like sobriety is just the key that unlocks everything else. Yeah. Like it isn't my main personality trait. It's what allows me to become who I am. Yeah. And I talk a lot about, I feel like I didn't even know who I was or have a real identity or know what I liked, because everything was kind of following the trends. Yep. Okay, everyone's doing this, everyone's doing that, everyone's getting margaritas after work. And it all links together, and you don't realize how much links into the drinking culture. Yeah. And this is something I think about like while I'm running today, and it's literally mind-boggling, because I'm like, why was I doing this or that? And it's all somehow linked to just not being okay with yourself, so going with the flow. Yeah. And then ending up living this life, and I always feel like, and it took me so long, sometimes I think it takes me 100 times to learn a lesson, but I always felt like this pull to get out of my life. Like I felt like I'm not doing the things I want to do. I'm not where I want to be. I'm not in the city I want to be. I'm not around the people I want to be around. And sometimes I would be in a room with 10 people and feel like I was completely alone. And I had this inkling in the back of my head, like, I feel like this isn't supposed to be. This is even when I'm sober in the beginning days. Like, I feel like this isn't supposed to be how I'm supposed to feel in sobriety. Like, I feel like there has to be other answers out there. But I just kept doing it and doing it. And then I would get depressed, like, oh my gosh, nobody's like me. And it's like this pattern of you're doing it to yourself and then feeling sorry for yourself. And as soon as I got out of that and realized, wait a second, I control my own life, I control my own decisions, and I can get myself out of this pattern, is when things started looking up. And then it still even took years from there to really find, because you don't know anything about yourself, so you have to test a million different things until you find exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like even like the sense of style, like what do I wear? What do I like wearing? Like all that stuff you get to learn again when you get sober. But yeah, you like, I mean, I felt so alone being surrounded by so many people. Yeah. And I was afraid of not having friends, like getting sober, when I like felt so lonely to begin with. But yeah, like getting sober, you get to like really connect with people. And yeah, like I feel so much closer to people when I'm in a room with someone and like we're talking about, like, I like your podcast name, like Get Real. Like I can't be shallow with people. Yeah. I feel weird like talking about stuff that's not real. I don't know how. And then like the second we get deep, I'm like, oh, like you are a human. Okay. Yeah. Like I can do that. Yeah.
No, it's the same for me. I remember the first time I was super vulnerable with someone that I wasn't, like, didn't know for 10 years plus. And I remember feeling guilty the next day and having like vulnerability hangover and being like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said this. I shouldn't have disclosed this. I had such anxiety from opening up to someone. Like that was weird to me. And now I'm exactly like what you're saying, where I feel weird if we're talking shallow. Like I generally just feel like I did so much work on myself in my own life that I'm just uninterested if we're just talking about shallow things, because I just feel like there's so much more to life than wasting your time having shallow conversations.
Yeah. Like how are you supposed to get to know somebody?
Yeah. I feel really uncomfortable, or I feel exactly what you're saying. Like you don't see them as a human being. It's really hard to formulate that connection.
Yeah.
I think it's great that you were able to meet your fiancé in recovery as well. What was that like? Do you remember feeling thoughts like, oh, I'm never going to be able to meet someone now, or anything like that? And how did all of that go down?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was thinking back to like what you were saying earlier. Like I remember talking with my sponsor, and I guess like I've gotten sober through like 12-step program. And so I've worked with a sponsor, and you know, she said, like, are there any reservations? This was, like, my first sponsor. And I was like, well, I can't imagine not drinking on my wedding night. She was like, okay, do you have a lot of suitors right now? I was like, no. She was like, okay, are you engaged? And I was like, no. She's like, okay, let's get sober, and then we'll talk about what you're going to do on your wedding night. And now, like, the thought of drinking when I, like, marry the love of my life is crazy to me. Like, I don't want to miss any second of that. But, yeah, we, like, met through the CRC. He was like also in college. He had transferred to CU Boulder because of the CRC, so he had tried to go to school elsewhere. It didn't go so well. He got sober, and then like found out about like schools that had CRCs, and so came to Boulder for that. And so we met there, and we were really good friends at first. Like I was just friends with all these I just had a lot of like guy friends at the time. There's a lot of men in sobriety. But yeah, I was like, you know, really good friends with all of them. And then we were kind of like the two most outdoorsy people. So we would like spend a lot of time together, and like oftentimes it was like just the two of us. And so we started to like kind of just be the two of us. And we started dating, and it was like about when I had 10 months of sobriety. So, you know, a little early, but it was good. And yeah, I remember like before then I was thinking like, I'm never going to meet someone. Like, how do people, I relied on alcohol so heavily to interact with like, you know, any type of, really any friendship, any type of relationship. I was like so dependent on being messed up. And so I just like had no idea how people could like be intimate without like alcohol. And now I don't get how people can be like intimate being messed up, you know. Like, how do you be real, and how do you get vulnerable with somebody, and like, do they know your soul, you know? Like, I get to like talk to him and share so much with him. But yeah, we've been together like for 4.5 years, and we're both sober. And I think like the most important thing is that like my sobriety is my sobriety, you know, and like I'm not getting involved in his sobriety, and he doesn't get involved in my sobriety. And like we both like really work our own like programs of sobriety, and we're both like volunteers with the Phoenix, and that's kind of like where we met, was on a Phoenix trip. That's where we became like closer, I guess. I'd met him before, but yeah. And I just think like it's so cool to be in a relationship with somebody who like, you know, because I think part of sobriety is like me being alive is dependent on me choosing to be a better version of myself tomorrow. Because if I'm not working on myself, like I'll go back to that life. And so like, you know, it's cool to be in a relationship with someone who's in the same boat, like where they want to be a better version of themselves, and they're like, their life depends on it. And it's been so cool to like watch him grow. And I suppose like that's probably how it feels. Like, I'm sure people feel that way about me, to like watch me grow, but you can't really see it in yourself. So it's so cool to like, you know, he's in grad school, he has this, you know, he has a job he loves. It's so cool to like see his life come to fruition. And all like because of sobriety. And our sobriety dates are like 5 days apart, but we didn't know each other when we were getting sober.
Wow,
and I think that's like
that's
very cute.
Really cool.
Yeah.
No, that's really, really cool. Do you feel like prior to getting sober that you struggled with dating or struggled with relationships with men or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of my drinking led me into like experiences that were like, you know, just, I'm not sure if I just don't remember like how I got there. And so there was like, I guess some like little T trauma there, that I like didn't know how to interact with men at all. And so then I would like date people, and I just like don't think I ever, you know, like, I mean, I think realistically I was always the problem, right? Like I was always the problem. And I just like didn't know how to be in a relationship. Like I didn't know how to end a relationship. So I would just like cheat on them, because I was like, I think I'm done, so I guess I'll just cheat on you, because I didn't know how to like break up with someone, you know. I didn't know how to like talk to them. I didn't know how to tell them how I felt. I didn't know how to say no, most importantly. And so I would just like date people because they were interested in me. You know, like I didn't ever think about like, is this what I want? Because I like couldn't say no to anybody. I thought like, and I think that's a self-esteem thing. Like I just don't think, like I hated myself so much that like the thought of somebody else loving me was like, okay, I can do that, you know. And now it's like, you know, I don't feel that way. Like I love who I am, so I can trust that like when he says he loves me because I also love me, you know.
Definitely. That's something that I really, really struggled with too, is the male validation aspect. And I just felt like I had such low self-esteem. And I feel like when you have such low self-esteem and you're also drinking, and people can tell that you don't care about yourself and that you are unsure of yourself and not you don't have a strong sense of self at all, and people can tell that. And I feel like I had a lot of trauma with guys in my teen years, and then started to try to, like, I never had a real relationship, so then I started to try to formulate relationships with people, and then I just had no way to communicate with them. Like there was one guy I saw on and off, and we were never even girlfriend and boyfriend, and I never had a real conversation with him looking back, and I thought I loved this guy. Like I remember like just being so devastated when we would have our off and just like hysterical crying and like thinking that I was in love with this guy. And then looking back, it's like I never had a singular real conversation with him. And now I'm like, what did we even talk about? Like when we went out to dinner, like what were we speaking about? Because I never told him anything about what I was struggling with. I never got real with him. And there was just no vulnerability. So I definitely feel like I would have struggled to have real conversations about like where are we going with things, like anything like that. So you just kind of get led down whatever they want, because it's like I can't do anything, you know, like I can't communicate what I want. And then I remember when I got sober, kind of similar, I was probably like honestly it was probably too early. It was like 6 months. My first ever boyfriend in sobriety, I remember when he told me he loved me for the first time, hysterical crying. Like and because it was a feeling that I had never had before, because I actually told this person about my eating disorder, about my alcohol issues, about how I got sober, about how I had to. Went to Chicago to get sober and stayed there for it was about 3-4 weeks. And I remember being there and being like, when I get out, I'm never telling anyone that I'm going here. And now I'm on a podcast telling everyone. And now I make jokes about being there all the time. But I told him about that, and I told him all this stuff, and he still said he loved me. And I was like, what? Like, why? Because I didn't think that anyone ever told each other problems. Like I thought it was like you put on this front, you put on this mask of yourself, and you just bebop through life. And that was it. Do you feel like that's a little bit about how you felt that everyone, like, did you, other than guys, did you have communication issues with friends or family or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, like, if I was ever, like, so to speak, getting real with someone, I don't think I thought that it meant anything to them. You know, like, I think at the end when I was, like, telling my friends, like, the dark place that I was in, I was already, like, messed up. So I think you can't really, like, experience vulnerability when you have these, like, shields. And I just, like, remember thinking, like, they don't really care anyway, so I can tell them whatever, and tomorrow they'll all forget about it. And, like, likely they did, you know, because we were all in that same, like, really, really dark place. But, yeah, I definitely, like, and I still struggle with, like in my closer relationships, not as much, but, like, it is hard to, like, not feel like a burden, you know. But I never feel like anyone's a burden when they tell me stuff. So why am I putting that on myself?
Exactly.
I love getting to be a part of people's lives, and I love feeling trusted. And so, like, yeah, when I'm, like, feeling like I can't tell someone what's really going on, like, it's usually, like, because, yeah, I'm in fear, you know, of feeling like they're not going to like me, and that's just such a silly place to be. I've never once felt that somebody's, like, a burden on my life, you know? Yeah.
Completely. And I just was thinking about even the first time I told one of my best friends, still to this day, thinking the same thing, is she going to like me after this? And then it's so silly, because thinking these people are the ones that saw me passed out, like, being crazy, blacked out of my mind, not making sense. And sometimes I would, especially once, like, trauma started happening, I would get super, super drunk and then, like, unload and tell them all my trauma while I was blacked out, and I wouldn't even remember. So, like, first of all, I already told you all this stuff while I was blacked out. I just don't remember. And also, you saw me at my lowest moments. You saw me literally pass out on a floor, face down. But then, like, I'm sitting here in a coffee shop with you, like, ready to die because I have such anxiety and so nervous that you're not going to accept me. And it's like, they've already seen you at your worst. Like, they already know you have a drinking problem, most likely. So I just think it's given me the most beautiful gift, being able to be sober. It's given me such incredible friends. And I've mentioned this before, but the people that really were there with you from the beginning, just deepening those connections, and then also formulating new connections in sobriety, and having those deep starts from the beginning is so special.
Yeah.
And such an amazing gift that sobriety only can give to you.
Yeah.
At least for me, because I would not have been able to do it without sobriety.
Definitely not. Yeah. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't gotten sober.
What do you think is the best part of your life that sobriety has given to you yourself?
Oh my gosh. I mean, just my life, right? Like just every little bit about it. Yeah, I mean, I have like a career that I care so much about, and I'm stoked on. That was kind of some Colorado lingo, but like I show
Beach
up
lingo too.
Okay, good. Yeah, I show up on Monday the same way I show up on Thursday, and I'm like really proud of the worker that I am. I love my relationships, like with my, my siblings and my parents, and I love that I like can grow in those, and that I'm like willing to take responsibility for when I'm not my best self, because you can't be all the time, and so it's okay to make mistakes. I love my, my partner, obviously. I'm so excited to, hopefully grow in our lives together. But I guess like the best thing would be like the community, like especially since moving to New York. Like I just was so afraid to move here and have nobody, and I've just like I have so many people. I almost don't have time for as many people as I have, and I love getting to like go on runs with people and talk so deeply, talk about life for like 11 miles goes by like nothing when you're like having deep conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I love like getting to watch other people, because you don't get to see it in yourself, I think. I love getting to watch other people get sober. Like I don't think there's anywhere else in the world where you can like go to a place on a Friday night and watch people's lives get saved, and it's like also fun and social,
Yeah.
like it's very, very special.
That's amazing. And then do you feel like in your career that people are supportive? Like I've heard some people are in industries that's a little more tough than others. How is it like that for you?
Yeah. I'm not like, I don't hide it, but I wouldn't say that I'm like going out and telling people that I'm like sober. And I think that's probably because I don't want to be seen as a narc. Like I don't want to like go into my whole story of addiction. So if I say I don't drink, I don't want people to be like, oh, like, she doesn't drink. Like, but, so I'm not like necessarily so open about it. But I never feel out of place. I never like, if I am in a situation where people are drinking and it's like with my career, like especially at where I'm at, I used to work in consulting, and now I'm like more in the industry. So I'm a data engineer, and I was like in consulting, and now I work in a tech company. And in consulting, like drinking was like way more a thing, I think. And I've like been sober my whole career, but I don't think I've ever, like I never felt weird. I always felt grateful. Like I would watch people like, get drunk in like work settings, and I would just be like so grateful to not have to be doing that. And I think like the same goes with where I'm at now. Like if I ever am like for whatever reason in a like we're at a team thing and people are drinking, I've noticed like alcohol is less heavy in where I'm at now. I like went out to eat with coworkers and not a single person ordered a drink.
Wow.
And I was confused and bothered, right? Like the sober one. I was like, what are you guys doing? Like, you don't drink. But they were like, they didn't need it that day, and that was cool. But yeah, I think like if they're drinking, I don't ever feel weird,
That's awesome. And I just highlight that because I feel like sometimes people think, first they think the relationship, then they think, how am I going to have a job, especially in New York City or a big city in the country. But you really can have it all in sobriety. Like you can have a great job. You can have great coworkers and formulate relationships with friends, repatch ones with family, get into loving relationships, and you can do it all. Even though the initial thoughts is I'm gonna lose everything, I've gained everything. in sobriety, and that was my very first thought, is I'm gonna lose everything.
Yeah.
When really I was lost before.
Yeah.
So it's so amazing to get to hear your story.
Thank
And
you.
I think it's so amazing to be a data engineer and be running and rock climbing and everything you do. I mean, it's phenomenal. And
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story and getting real with us.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Of course. For any parting words, what would you say to someone that's listening to this, that's trying to get sober and doesn't think that they can do it?
Man, I would say you are not alone. Like, if I could show everyone from my high school that reaches out to me how many other people from my high school reach out to me, I think they would not feel alone. I've had so many people say, like, I feel so lonely, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could connect you all. You're not alone, and, you know, the sooner you do it, the better. Rock bottom is, like, when you decide to stop digging, and it's only up from there, so do it now.
Heard it here first. Thanks for getting real. Thanks for tuning in and getting real with us. Podcasts will be posted every other Wednesday on Spotify and YouTube. Please reach out via DM if you want to chat.